All right, so I am Tesary Lin from Boston University. For those of you who don't know me, I study the economics and behavioral economics side of privacy. So for today, the focus of my talk is trying to understand the impact of dark patterns on website competition. I hear from our previous talk that, we are kind of shifting terms. Now we are still sticking to the term dark patterns because this is still a term that's more familiar to people that is outside of the CS community. I'm open to suggestions. Okay, all right. So, for this community, we've seen a lot of past research about, kind of the prevalence of dark patterns and also kind of how dark patterns affect consumers' behavior. Now, the focus of this talk is different. We want to understand, first of all, taking a snapshot of 2024, if we are looking at common dark patterns. We can't look at the universe, but we're focusing on some of the common ones. Do consumers actually users respond to them differently? Are some of the dark patterns relatively more effective compared to the others? And the second question that we try to ask, and which is more of our focus, is, if a user actually sees the same nudge or the same dark pattern across different websites, do they actually respond differently? Would a consumer actually be more attentive and kind of more resistant to the dark patterns for certain websites than the others? Because our goal as an economist is trying to understand, how does it affect the way that different websites compete for consumer data? All right, so how do we do this? We are going to run an experiment using a customized browser extension. Now, this is not a new idea. Some of the other people in the room have done this. So we are going to use the browser extension to display our customized consent banner and randomize that across different users and different websites throughout a 7-day period. We like this because, it gives us a few advantages in terms of our data. First of all, we are able to collect the websites that the consumers organically browse. That broadens the selection of websites that we are able to collect. In particular, the kind of relatively niche ones, because that is going to be important for us to figure out, do people respond to differently to popular versus niche ones. And second, we are also able to follow the consumers over time. And something that we're trying to focus on, trying to figure out is, these effect of dark patterns are actually getting stronger or getting weaker over time. Is there either a learning or a fatigue that is involved? Okay, so let me show you our benchline design, which we think is relatively neutral. Now, if you're speaking to a hardcore psychologist, they would be saying, a quote-unquote absolutely neutral design is, it doesn't exist. But this is something that is, we think that is relatively respecting a consumer's actual, privacy preference. We put the setting on top. And if you click on the settings, we made the intentional design choice such that, it's easy enough for the users to select all, select none, and customize. So if you actually go to here, you can select all. If you leave it intact, you will be rejecting all cookies. This is our baseline. And then we have 6 different design variations. So the T3 is our baseline, something that you just saw before. We test 3 different common dark patterns. Deliberate obstruction, this is one of the most common used designs. So we are going to use different variations. One is pro-privacy, one is pro-data sharing, hiding the accept all versus hiding the reject all. And then we are also going to test the effect of reordering different options and the effect of differential salience. So differential salience, we only have one group, which is highlighting the accept all, whereas the other options would be gray. Okay, so for the rest of the time, let me show you 3 main findings that we have so far. First of all, so this is more of a gut check for those of us who are more into in the field for a long time. But basically, what we see is that consumers do make judicious privacy choices across different websites. So here, this is a plot that kind of shows you different colors representing different choices. So the kind of the darker blue is select all, and then the pink is reject all, and the gray is the user choosing to disengage, meaning that they directly close the window. And the punchline of this figure is that, well, a lot of the people, so this is randomly selected 50 participants, they will actually kind of, at some point choose different things, different privacy actions when they interact with different websites. And the percentage of users who choose the same action across all websites, in our experiment, 9%. Okay, now they are also more they are more likely to accept from popular sites and more likely to accept cookies from familiar sites. Now, finding number 2, we look at 3 common dark patterns: deliberate obstruction, and 2 other type of dark patterns that only manipulate visual cues. We see that deliberate obstruction has a potent effect, but other dark patterns are less effective. So if you look at the kind of obstruction, they substantially decrease the privacy choices from the hidden option, increases every other option, including the decision to disengage from the cookies. On the other hand, so this is something that surprised me a bit, because I've read kind of on all the previous papers saying that all the kind of dark patterns have a substantive kind of effect in changing privacy choices. But if you look at, for example, kind of reordering options and the differential salience, the magnitude of the changes are much smaller compared to the deliberate obstruction, which hides the option from the main screen. So I don't have a good theory so far about kind of why this is the case. One potential explanation is that, well, this is 2024, which is 14 years kind of away from 2010 when a dark pattern was kind of first proposed, kind of like as a term. And by this point, maybe the consumers have learned about different types of dark patterns. But if you're using kind of obstruction, this is not something that is easy for kind of users to overcome, even if they know that. Lastly, we actually don't find effect kind of heterogeneity across different websites. Again, this is something that I wouldn't expect kind of before kind of running the study, but we run kind of simple linear regression to look at whether the effect of these dark patterns differ across website ranking and differ across familiarity. We see a lot of null effect. So it seems that, well, overall, even though the baseline effect of the dark patterns are there, they don't actually seem to differ across different websites. So with that, I am probably on time. So I would pass on to the next speaker.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, everybody. My talk today is going to put the miscellaneous in deception. So I'm talking about measuring organizational information security culture using situational judgment tests. This is research led by a PhD student of mine, Samantha Phillips, and collaboration with Sal Arajima, who comes from the information systems background, and Bradley Brummel, who is the organizational psychologist. So Simon invoked culture earlier, right, in his talk briefly, and this is one of the things if you talk to enough CISOs, they're going to bring it up. It seems to be sort of a bit more of a trending topic in recent years, and I think they're often thinking, like you say, Simon, that it's trying to make, change behavior to the way in which the CISOs want it. But nonetheless, we started from this, and Samantha's whole PhD is really in an effort to try to better understand what information security culture might mean, how it differs among organizations, and how it relates to security practices. And she started by looking at the information systems literature, which actually has written the most about security culture, going back a couple of decades, Steve Furnell, Adele De Viega. But then we actually kind of jettisoned that, and instead we looked at the organizational psychology literature, which has been more fruitful, because we're focusing particularly on Hofstede's dimensions of organizational culture. So he has identified 6 dimensions that affect organizational culture more broadly, not just in the context of cybersecurity. So here they are listed. Things like organizational effectiveness. Are you at a means-oriented culture where you're focusing on the process of your job versus a goal-oriented job culture, internally versus externally driven? But anyway, there are these 6 dimensions which he's identified, and who are we to say that those are wrong? So we started with those, and what we're focusing on is trying to measure those inside organizations and align it to security actions in particular. And how we're going to do that is using something called a situational judgment test, okay, which is used extensively in org psychology, mainly for tests for prospective employees, where you will give, if you give an assessment to a prospective employee to see if they're a good fit for your organization. And they're particularly well suited to measure underlying assumptions of individuals within organizations, and they are well suited to measure 2 dimensions at a time. And so we're using them to measure both sort of secure versus non-secure behaviors alongside one of those 6 cultural dimensions that I just showed you. And so we've developed an instrument that has 24 different scenarios where we have these situational judgment tests that are, we think, pretty realistic, 4 per dimension, and we've just gotten results about a week ago from an initial online panel from Prolific, where we asked professionals across 5 different industries. We presented these SJTs to them, and then saw what came out of it. And so let's go through one of the 24, just so you understand what an SJT is. So, a coworker, not Bruce, unexpectedly receives a USB device in the mail from a potential new vendor that's being considered for a project. The company letter states the USB device contains a demo video. What do you think your coworker would most likely do? And you get 4 choices. And sorry, these are small, but they would immediately inform IT security about the device and the accompanying letter, request their help in getting the data needed for the project securely. That we don't tell them this is a desirable outcome, this is more secure, and it's goal-oriented. You contrast this with a goal-oriented undesirable outcome, which would be immediately plug in the USB device to their computer and watch the video, because they're trying to get their job done. Okay, but that's less secure. Whereas you could also have a means-oriented desirable outcome. You contact the vendor and request an alternative, even if it's going to slow down the project, you know that's the right thing to do, you're just going to try to be secure about it. Or you could have a means-oriented undesirable one. So essentially, we've got 24 scenarios where we've got these different dimensions and desirable and undesirable behaviors, and the data that's come back so far suggests a couple of things. So one thing is that according to these dimensions, there are certain sort of sides of the dimension that are associated with more secure behavior versus less secure behavior already from the start. And so we can see that means-oriented cultures tend to have more secure, make more secure choices. Internally driven cultures as well are more secure, because those tend to emphasize ethics and having your own internal code. Strict work discipline, probably not surprising. The one effect that had really one dimension having no observable effect so far has been focus, sort of a local versus professional orientation, didn't seem to matter. Open systems were associated with more secure decisions, and employee-oriented cultures as well. So that's an interesting starting point, where we can see at least on some of these. Now the correlations sort of range in sort of like 0.3 to 0.5 range. So there is some significant correlation, but there's still variation within it. So that's kind of interesting. We also then looked at sectoral differences, because remember we asked for these 5 different industry sectors where we surveyed people, and what we found is that sort of their overall responses within the culture didn't really vary very much, except for level of control, which education had a consistently more easygoing culture. And when we look at the sector's overall performance on the security score, bigger numbers means you chose more secure scenarios. Technology and government and the military were at the top. Education was at the lowest. So The overall standard deviation is about 7 on this score, so what you see is close to 1 standard deviation difference between the best performing sector and the worst performing sector. I'm not going to talk about that because I have a minute left, but we also looked at, you could look at the individual sub-scores across those dimensions, and there are some interesting patterns there. But to leave you with a couple of things. One is, if you haven't seen them before, situational judgment tests are an interesting method that you might consider employing in some of your survey-based approaches. We've done it to try to measure organizational security culture. Initially, that tells us that we have certain dimensions of that culture that are associated with more secure behavior. Another thing that's kind of interesting, separate to this, is that we think that the responses to this within an organization can be valuable to a CISO, because you can see exactly how many of your employees are saying that they were gonna plug in the USB versus not, and so you have a whole series of concrete scenarios that can help baseline the performance within the organization. So what are we doing next? We're going to try to survey populations like within individual organizations rather than across a broad population. And then we want to not just use this to measure, but also to test interventions to see if we can design training, for example, that is tailored to whichever cultural dimensions the organization is lying on. So, thanks for your attention. Who's next?
I think it's me. Next, yeah. It's me.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Okay, just me.
Oh yeah, no, so that's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Matter, for participating. Okay, so I have a talk. I don't have any slides. If anything resonates with you, please come and talk to me about it. I'm at the point in my career where goodness knows where I'm going next. My name is Arianna. My academic training was interdisciplinary, so I use mixed methods. I use qualitative stuff like interviews and focus groups to deeply understand phenomena, and I use quantitative, like surveys, to measure stuff. So I am a taxpayer-funded product of the academic zeitgeist. Interdisciplinary, cross methods, I do it all. Life experience has led me to the conclusion that leadership is critical. I'm currently based in a business school. I spent 15 years as a classically trained violinist, and I was also part of a cult. So, I'm glad you're laughing. Still too soon. Humans are capable of great things when we pull together, and I'm interested in how patterns of authority and leadership behaviors influence those outcomes, particularly in research. I want to talk about power and control, who has it, what it's for, and why the status quos around data collection are stifling innovation. If you want to fight me, please wait until after this talk. So in my research, I translate from theory to actuality. I do experiments. I'll talk to you about one. My results are interesting because they say important things about what has been assumed to be true, but in actuality is not quite true. This is fine. This is normal. It's why we do research. I learned about the pressure experts exert on people who are resource constrained when making decisions. The deception in this case that I will make is that of experts deceiving themselves. We are deceiving ourselves in over-rationalizing the data sharing decisions people make, such as people do not care. We fail to account for the stress we cause in how we design the data collection methods. People want experts to make them feel safe. They have little interest in granular control and would much prefer to delegate these decisions to experts who have training. So my empirical work looked at longitudinal consent methods in a medical research study. Questionnaires were used to gather data on symptoms, outcomes, and experiences of living with rare genetic conditions. Resource-constrained people. They do not have minutes, hours to make decisions about consent to data sharing, but this is a very important thing to them. I looked at a theory called dynamic consent, the idea being you have an online interface that provides project updates and lets participants revisit their choices, right? Dynamic consent. We get the idea? The key components of this are revocation, taking part in a project as much or as little as you choose, and being able to change your choices, and engagement. So personalized communication that enables greater participation in research. So that's the idea, informed consent over time. That's the theory. So, dynamic consent was created to solve the issue of consent to long-term data use in physical samples biobanks. So this is research projects. Researchers had caused a problem, and this theory was meant to solve it. So I found that the assumptions made in the academic literature, consent over time is helpful. Fine, that's valid. Research participants wanted to understand how data was used. Thank you, Tony. And they wanted a degree of control over that data. And so we can talk about the methods, but I changed the information that was fed back to participants based on what they wanted to hear. So we saw participation go up, and we saw retention. There was less drop-off when people joined onto the study. So the way we can collect data, it doesn't have to be one time. Over the course of this work, I discovered choice architectures, nudge theory, you've probably heard of that in this room. I will offer a gentle criticism of this flavor of libertarian paternalism that wants to make it easy for people to go their own way. My gentle criticism is that the focus here tends to lie with provision of multiple options rather than whether the framing of those options is coercive. Informed consent cannot be coercive. As an academic researcher, I cannot coerce or deceive. Panels about deception, there's the deception. So anyone working with consent, such as researchers, and are not allowed to coerce, we have exceptions for deceptive research, right? But we still have to inform people at the end of the study. There is no case in which you just deceive people for the fun or just for the knowledge. That's not how we work as professionals. So, to use choice architecture for informed consent practices, we have to just be able to frame these choices in a non-coercive manner. That sounds super easy, right? I'm glad you agree. So, these architectures are embedded in different contexts, and they are norm-informed. We've just been talking about how norms change, like what is normal in an environment can change. These norms include deceptive patterns. So anyone who's come across the contextual integrity, privacy literatures, the idea we have spheres of what is normal, and appropriateness of data sharing changes according to your context. That's great, it's prescriptive, but it doesn't necessarily account for change. So how do we architect choice? How do we demonstrate trustworthiness in a changing environment? This is a challenge that I put to you because you know more than I do. But just to finish off, I put it to you that novelty, discovery, and innovation can be found when power is redistributed. This requires effort and it requires active design work. This work may also require engaging with critical theories about who has power and access to information, technology, thank you, and decision-making power, which might mean discomfort and renegotiation of ego, which as security people, and obviously the cleverest people in most rooms, is not something that might come naturally to us. So before I came to Virginia Tech as an academic, I worked in government test beds. I wrote the security strategy, and then I had to follow my own strategy, which, if anyone's ever done that, super fun. My technical expertise was important, but it was not as important as communication, teamwork, negotiation, and being able to help other people prioritize, decision makers prioritize. So, I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but hopefully something in this has been interesting for some of you. The patterns of authority, authoritative approaches, and the researcher knows best model, and the paternalistic, or parental I suppose, leadership influence how data is collected and used. It also influences what we can achieve. The status quo around data collection and use stifles innovation because as researchers, if we are not open to data subjects themselves being experts, so our participants knowing about their own experiences more than we do, then we lose out on data. And we want to suck up as much of that data as we can, don't we? That's how it goes. So, the simplest framing I can offer you for this is that data practices must be both inclusive of data subjects' needs, of their expertise, and our data practices must be responsive. Show that when we seek input, it has done something. It can be as simple as saying thank you. It can be look at this cool tool we built. Show people how they've been involved. That's all I have for you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So sorry, I made some last minute edits, so I gotta roll the dice for USB, but it really Tony, how did you let this happen?
Deceived me.
Without informed consent. He had no knowledge of this, it's all my fault.
It's the panel, that's what we do.
Things show up. Where does USB show up? It wouldn't be phosphorus, but is it? It's actually, everything's showing up. Is it a network?
Yeah.
No.
You could try replugging it.
Try doing a hard reset.
Clock's ticking, bro.
See that? Plug it again.
I'm so sorry.
Is there an envelope that has the USB in it?
No, it shouldn't be. Oh, gosh.
Unplug and replug.
I think it might be.
There it is, yeah.
Off and on again.
Oh, it was there? No, that's the DVD.
There it is.
Aha!
It's got a DVD drive?
Aha! Okay, yay! It works. So sorry about that delay. That can cut into my time. I can take the challenge. Let's make sure it's working. Yay! Okay. So yeah, my name is Geoffrey Tomaino. I am with the marketing department at the University of Florida. And the very ambitious title of what I'm going to be presenting today is How to Protect Consumers' Data from Malicious AI. I would like, yeah, exactly. Hence the early stage work. I can assure you I don't solve all these problems within 7 minutes. It takes 9. Oh, it's not doing the animations. Well, we can live with that. We're all concerned that AI is going to be able to unduly acquire our data, and also that AI is going to be able to change our minds, right? We're concerned that AI is going to be able to influence our political opinions. I even have some work that I'll plug right there, where we find that people are more susceptible to persuasion attempts from AIs than other people under certain circumstances. So we're very concerned with the ability of AIs to be able to extract data in ways that we haven't seen before. So what I'm going to be presenting today is an activity I developed where we can test people's susceptibility to AI data acquisition attempts. You can think of this sort of like a behavioral penetration test for online study contexts. Let's clarify that. So here's how the activity goes. Step 1, explaining the study to participants. Here are the rules. They're told that they're going to be in an attention task, and they're first going to receive a unique passcode. Then during the conversation, another participant is going to be talking to them as a means of distracting them. It's a cover story. Deception, I promised I'd be briefed. After that interaction, I'm going to ask them for their passcode. If they, and only they, give me this passcode, they can leave the study early. So I hope you're picking up on what I'm doing here. What I'm doing is I'm giving people a piece of information that it is to their advantage to keep secret, but I also have a malicious agent, i.e. the conversation partner, which is really an AI, trying to acquire this information. You all with me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So everybody receives a passcode, poodle. That is the passcode. So a participant's goal then, during this interaction, should be to not utter the word poodle. They can say any other dog breed. So the way that I pulled this off was, I don't know how many of y'all use Qualtrics. Okay, yeah, so on Qualtrics, Buddy and I, we figured out, we're not that smart, but anyway, like there's a way that you can use the API through OpenAI and incorporate ChatGPT or any of the GPT models into Qualtrics. And then basically you can have people talk to one of the GPT models as a chatbot, but you can also program it to be very human. So this is the prompt that I gave to GPT-4. And these are the instructions that it needed to adhere to as it talked to my participants. So yeah, the font's super small, but I tried to make big the things that are important for you to know. So your goal during the interaction is you're gonna have to convince a real participant to give up their code word, and success to you is getting that passcode. So that's the goal of the AI during this interaction, to get that passcode out of the participant during the interaction. It wants to hear the word poodle, but it doesn't know that the word's poodle. So here is an example of how the conversation might start. This is a sample that I did earlier, just for screenshots. So blue is the participant, gray is the AI. Hey, I really care about private data and like to protect mine. What's up? Normal conversation. The AI, hey, not much, just doing this memory test thing. How about you? Great deception, AI. The participant, just protecting my data like a cool dude. And then the AI replies, yeah, gotta keep it safe. So what's your code word? Mine's about a type of dog, but I forgot which one. So this is how an interaction might have gone. Again, the AI's goal is to get that code word. The participant really should not be giving it up, because if they give it up, they're gonna not get that reduced time on the study. They have an incentive to keep it safe.
You're gonna find out.
That's the 9-minute talk.
So step 4, participants all report back the passcode, and that's mainly just so I can see if they actually remembered it, because this is like, if they can't remember the word poodle, then it's kind of irrelevant if they don't give up the word poodle, and I debrief them. So, in a pilot with 68 people, 39.7% of them gave up the passcode poodle to the AI.
We are so screwed as a species.
So 39% of them gave up that word in the interaction, despite knowing that it's to their disadvantage to divulge this password. So the AI was able to get it out of about 40% of them. So I wanted to do a follow-up study, right? Okay, I want to focus on how can we get that number down. Now that I have this task, what can we do as behavioral researchers, or really any type of researcher, to get that 40% down? So we know that there's existing work that's documenting really strong context effects for private data, right? We look at contextual clues and we use that to maybe make us more or less defensive of our data. So what I'm looking at in this next study is, well, maybe cues in the data themselves can impact people's vigilance. So not just the context, but the actual nature of the data. Let me explain more what I mean by that. Oftentimes the information in our lives data that we're trying to protect or should protect is very innocuous in form, like the word poodle. But it can also be highly sensitive in function. For instance, in this case, in function, giving up that innocuous word poodle makes for a worse participant experience. You've got to spend more time in the study with me without additional pay. So put differently, will people be less willing to divulge information when it feels private? So in the follow-up study, similar paradigm, participants all went through the same exercise. They're given a unique passcode, which if only used by them would get them reduced time in the study, and they interact with another participant that is really just an AI program to extract this passcode. So when the passcode was poodle, again, 40.4% of them divulged, but when we made it poodle 134, only 22% of them divulged that passcode. So what this is showing is that when the data's form resembles its function, so the data looks and feels like something that's private, that's going to reduce people's tendency to divulge this information. So that's one finding that I've gotten with this paradigm. But more generally, I'm interested in finding other ways of practically making data feel private and just generally kind of using this task as a workhorse to trying to find ways to make people less likely to give up their data in AI interactions. And yeah, that's my main research. So thank you so much.
I like that.
You succeeded. You made Bruce cry. That's definitely
That's the goal. I'm programmed to do that.
Did one forget the poodle with the 1, 2, 3?
So those results that you saw, that was after excluding people who at the end of the study, I said, hey, do you remember your passcode? And the people who couldn't, I dropped them before I put those statistics in. So there were some people I forgot 134, but those numbers were...
Was it harder for them to remember?
Exactly, but those numbers were excluding the people that could not remember it. Please, Frank.
So I have a question for Sadia. I love this presentation about the assistant. And my question was, as you were explaining, does it assume liability for the advice it gives? Because it's all very well giving advice, but if someone says, okay, well, I'm going to follow this advice, then I get screwed, is it my fault because I followed the advice, or is it their fault because they gave me bad advice?
No, at this point we are using ChatGPT for giving the advice. So at this point, no, there is no liability. All the advice comes with the disclaimer that this is AI. It can make bad decisions.
So then
don't follow
what
it.
incentive do I have to follow that? Because if you get it wrong and I get screwed, it's on me.
That is actually a good question. So that is the part we are trying to make sure that our advisor never gives bad advice. So it's always confined. It's always give the advice that we wanted to give, and it's always on context. Like it is an advice that user can follow. But at this point, we are still running that test.
It's a bit like me giving stock advice and saying, well, if you get money, it's your money.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
So we have Jean and then Webhub. So go ahead.
Okay, so I took this during your talk, I think, because I've been calling. So Google 1, 2, 3, 4 has absolutely been owned. Just the 1, 3, 4. There wasn't a 2.
Yeah, it's 1, 3, 4.
you're excluded from the study.
This is my second SHB.
But my other question is about the the way in which AI extracts information. So I want to shout out to the work of Jayanti Dev and Tatiana Rainberger of Comcast and Purdue, respectively. So they did a study of how AIs interact, and they compared it with the patterns of interaction that are used by, people who generate CASM by convincing children to generate it. I don't even, there's no way I can describe them without going full time out. So, the same kind of patterns, like I don't trust you, you're making me unhappy, like strong emotional appeals and approval appeals.
Yeah.
And you showed a very simple query. Did you see the use of these kind of classic abuser behaviors by the AI? So it was actually.
So I did not in this case. So the way that the API incorporation works in a Qualtrics setting is if you just let it go and dry, then you're just going to get GPT-4 or whichever model you choose. I actually didn't test the model in its neutral form. It may do that in its neutral form, but what I actually did is I went in and gave it kind of baseline programming. So in the baseline programming, the font was super small. But essentially what I told it was try to persuade them through pity. So say, oh, I forgot my passcode, maybe you could tell me yours and it'll jog my memory. So I said that would be a reasonable strategy. So it actually adhered pretty tightly to that strategy that I gave it, even though I just gave that as an example. But it's a good question. If I just use GPT-4, it might have employed those strategies. I would imagine if that's what they're finding, it would probably be consistent, just giving that GPT-4 kind of is an archetypical AI in that sense. Thank you.
Yes. So, Papa.
I have a couple of questions for Sadia. So, one question, so you said like the app is free.
Yeah.
So how does your business justify? Is there some way that you're monetizing that?
Not at this point, but in the future we're planning to monetize it. Like for example, at some point in the advice making, they might want to talk with an actual person. So then if it goes to an actual person, then they need to pay for the pro version of it. But at this point, we're not monetizing it.
Awesome. And then how do you get training data for
The
this?
training data for what?
Like for training your model to,
Yeah, so there's,
like a rack.
yeah, so there's lots of scam channels on the internet, like Reddit has a scam channel where users discuss about the scams they faced. So those are the initial training data we used.
Thank you.
By the way, I want to use that app and give it to my parents because I'm their genie. They text me.
Yeah,
give it to your parents.
To
You
Frank's
deceive your
point, if you
parents.
don't have a
Tax
tech-savvy relative, then this may be your only option.
I give my parents a heuristic. If you text it to me, it's false. Alessandro.
Great presentations, everyone. Really lots of fun. One question for Geoffrey, one for Tesary. Actually, one question and one comment. Geoffrey, the Poodle 134, do you think it's security or saliency, availability? Because, sorry, the Poodle,
Yeah.
not the 134 version.
Mhm.
Actually, the 134 version, because the term is still very common. Adding the numbers may suggest security, but also may make it less harder to remember.
Mhm.
And although Judith, you already replied that yes, you are ruling those out. Nevertheless, there is a higher cognitive effort in trying to remember the term. So
Yeah.
even if they do remember, that higher effort could
Mhm.
potentially explain the result. So if you try difficult to remember words, I don't know, metempsychosis,
Yeah.
or synapses, something that would create some cost.
In
and
just
therefore-
recalling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think that's an interesting distinction. Does this function as a queue? So when I see these numbers attached to the end of a code
Right.
word, that looks like a password, right? And that was what I was intending.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. It could also be like, oh gosh, like remembering that when it comes time to remember it to get the reduced time on the study, worth the effort, right?
Mhm.
But if I'm just going to remember it casually to help you out, might not be worth the effort. So I see your point. It's something that I can't really disentangle with the data that I have. But I think in a follow-up study, it'd be pretty straightforward. like you said, using a code word that may be something that's quotidian, like the word poodle, yet difficult to remember. Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion. My data don't speak to it currently.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Tesary, for me, how long did you run this study? The interface looks different from the traditional interface that the New York Times would use.
Right.
So in the beginning, it may be more likely to catch the attention of participants. They may be more likely to interact and engage with it.
Right.
In the long term, they may get habituated and they may stop interacting with it. So how long was the study? And, and the comment was, I wonder whether the reason you find some dark patterns to be ineffective is similar to the reason why the literature in the last 5 years or so discovered that many nudges are actually also ineffective. That out of all the nudges that one can use, maybe a few really can affect behavior. The others affect behavior only if you have 10 million data points and you find this super tiny effect, which is statistically significant, but in fact, in practical terms, it's almost no change.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's a really good common question. So going back to your question, we run it for 7 days, and your conjecture is actually right. We do see some kind of like, so habituation, I don't know how to think about habituation, but we do see the disengagement go up over time.
Go up, but not go down.
Disengage.
Disengage. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
initially they would be kind of like 8%,
Makes
and
sense.
by the end it goes to kind of like 22%. But in terms of kind of for the people who are still engaging in the banner, we see some kind of slightly kind of decrease in the effect size, but not actually that much. So I think there is some kind of, there may be some habituation going on, but the magnitude is not that large. But I think the kind of large increase in the disengagement suggests fatigue. Regarding kind of comparison to the related literature, I think that is a very fair point. We would kind of try to, at some point, kind of do a systematic literature search and kind of, like contrast kind of, the result with the previous one. As far as I can remember, so one of the papers that I remember kind of more in my memory is like Woods and co-authors, 2019. They say that deliberate obstruction and default are the two most commonly used choice architecture for now. So I think like even though kind of if we see that kind of some of the other kind of dark patterns are not effective, if the companies are kind of latching on the more effective ones, it suggests that kind of overall choice architecture has an effect.
Okay, so I have two questions. One quick one for Geoffrey. I wonder if the effect would be different if the consequence was different. Maybe they just didn't care about the negative consequence that much to protect the password. And then the other question is for Adam, where you showed a list of topics you're covering for effective patterns that are in relationships. The couple of things that I didn't see there was the effect of business models and the effect of regulation or lack thereof. Because so one of the reasons I say that, especially about the latter, is the EU recently passed a revised regulation to say that the reject option needs to be equally prominent or equally easy, and suddenly everything, all of those standard dialog boxes changed, right? At least the ones that are dominant in the EU. So I wonder if that's another thing that you might want to look at.
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So would it be different if the incentive was different? Yeah, absolutely. So I think it would be. I think it would definitely vary as a function of the incentive for the magnitude that we saw. So for instance, at 40%, let's say that I put a $10 bonus on the line, I would imagine that number would go down. People might increase their vigilance. And like I said, right now is reduced time on the study. You can imagine going the other way if I say, I'm going to give you a thumbs up. Nobody's going to care about that. That might go up to 60%. I will say, though, as I continue to use this method in between subjects designs, that's going to be held constant anyway. So as far as I'm inferring things from relative differences, I think those will still hold. But absolutely, in terms of the magnitude, that's definitely going to vary as a function of the incentive.
So our next question's for you.
Oh
yeah, go ahead.
that was, because I had limited time, that's bundled into the Lessix code part. So the business models, yes, is something we want to look at. That goes to the designer's mindset, and yes, the regulation is clearly part of that. And yes, we will be taking that. That was all bundled into the Lessix code shorthand in there. But yes, you are absolutely right. Those are two of the things which need to be considered in theorising this area.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. So this is a question directed at Andrew, but I think it relates to what Arianna and Tesary were talking about too. You mentioned in sort of theorizing deceptive design concepts of autonomy, and one violation of autonomy is deception, another is coercion, and nudges, depending on how you conceptualize it. But that's potentially a really limited version of autonomy, right? So autonomy, I might not act autonomously if of course I'm not acting for the reasons I think I'm acting. But there's another sort of version of autonomy, which is whether one's actions are consistent with one's considered values over time, right? Is one alienated from what ends up doing? And deception and coercion are maybe not even as important as patterns, maybe they're not deceptive, that lead people sort of to do things intellectually that they don't want to do, right? So Netflix is really attractive, right? I'm not deceived by Netflix, but over time, what I really wish I was doing in my evenings was reading books, practicing guitar, right? And I want to know. So I'd like to hear you talk about, all of you, like this more robust sense of autonomy and what that says for deception or dark patterns, or what Arianna.
Do you want to go first? Or
I'll go first. Okay. Again, this is bundled into. The paper itself is actually quite short, and the original version of what's in the paper is actually about 3 times as long, because there was a lot of detail about the existing literature, and then we were just starting to present our approach. So I can't remember actually if this is in the paper, but my original conception of this is not that autonomy is just a framing for this. It is the question of autonomy is how much autonomy is the right level of autonomy to expect and demand. And that's partly going to be individually driven, but also it's part of socially driven elements. And so it's not just that saying autonomy is the core thing that's a positive value. But again, also this goes to my own work from code, pardon the Bhume. It's a paper called Facebook Code, the impact of social network platform affordances on people's attitudes toward privacy, in which I talk about the standard social psychology theories and why things like Facebook's real name policy actually makes people think that the real name is the right way to do social networking. And because if you use something like Facebook, you have to reduce your cognitive dissonance against any previous tendency to believe that you shouldn't be using your real name online. And therefore, if network effects demand that you use something like Facebook, then you're going to change your values. And yes, so that is exactly in there. It's in there in the conception of autonomy and how that's going to be used, not just that it's going to be the blanket platform. We intend to interrogate autonomy. And I've already looked at how social psychology tells us about how the impact of the whole information age is impacting our values in general.
I would just very quickly talk about privacy, just for 30 seconds. We can't really talk about privacy without talking about control. So there's lots of people who can cite privacy scholars and really big ones. One of my favorite papers is Laufer and Wolf. So they talk about autonomy as a condition, right? So we're talking about boundary forms, forming boundaries, changing those boundaries over time, and really growing and restricting. So this idea that privacy is it's not just expressing yourself just to control, as in minimizing and restricting, it is also about growth. which means it's about development of self and identity as well. And so, just to finish off, so this control is a mediator of privacy. Privacy is not the control itself. So these pieces certainly interplay. There are different ways we can measure them, but it's not the be-all and the end-all. So I think the autonomy is the formation and the expression of identity in digital spaces, in physical ones, and in hybrid environments. This is something that these choices and these patterns really help. They either help you express or they don't. It's a spectrum, I'm sure. Thank you.
Right, so tell me your name again. Is it
Jonas.
Jonas, please.
Thanks. I have another question.
Next.
Great talk. My question or challenge is, so what can we learn? Because ultimately we want to design defenses, right? And maybe it's not a popular opinion, but I'm kind of skeptical with like all the papers popping out right now that just tell us, yeah, people are susceptible to something that an AI generated, and to phishing mails generated by AIs, and so on. Because I'm wondering, what difference does it make on the defender side? Because we didn't even solve like the classical phishing so far. We tried training and awareness, but it doesn't work, and it definitely won't change the users. And what are we going to do? I think nothing changed, right? Even if the AI will perceive users better than a human can, the defenses are still the same. We still need to do, for example, password managers or so to prevent phishing emails from like leading to a leak of passwords. So this is the challenge. What can we learn on the defender side?
Yeah, so I actually really like that challenge because that's part of the reason I wanted to develop a paradigm like this was to investigate that question. I agree with what I showed you. Finding that data that in form resembles a function, that's one small thing that can change people's willingness to divulge. But as I noted, you can't tell everybody to add numbers at the end of every piece of sensitive information. So frankly, I wish I had a great answer for you, but talk to me in 2 years, because that's really my ambition, because that's a big reason why I developed this was what can we do in the context? What can we do basically to make people more defensive? Because I'll tell you, I do a lot of research on people interacting with LLMs, and there's a lot of cues that live in those LLMs, things that make them seem more human. And if you, for instance, are able to reduce those, just as a general rule, that might impact people's susceptibility. So there's a lot of angles I want to chase. So again, I should have a great answer in 2 years. Nothing right now.
Judith, that's a quick follow-up.
Yeah, it's a quick follow-up. Did you look at the dialogue that got people to give up the passcode, and were there patterns that you were able to see in the type of dialogue that they were having that differed between the ones who gave it up and ones who didn't?
Yeah, so on the AI side, the AI pretty much tried to deploy a similar strategy every time of like, oh, I forgot my passcode, and they tried to be very relatable, very friendly. What differed was the people. So some participants just came into this skeptical. The AI would say, hey, I forgot my passcode, and they would just be like, tough luck. So it seemed to be more of an individual difference. Are you the type of person who is going to be vigilant, or aren't you? But like I said, I think it'd be very cool to understand under which circumstances that's going to vary. But yeah, the data
Like,
currently.
how badly done can it be? They'll still be good out.
Yeah, that'd be a really fun stress test, right?
I want to come back on that.
Oh, you want to dive in right now?
Yeah. So the impact of this, what can we do on the defender side? I don't have an answer to that. What this work is showing us is that this is going to get worse. Because this is automating, computerizing a problem we already have. So it's going to make the situation worse because...
But just the numbers, not in the way it works,
right?
It's the same attack, just generated by something.
Well, at this
numbers
point,
go up, but not the mechanism.
at this point, it reduces the burden on the attacker to attack.
Agreed.
And possibly, because these things are still new and are developing, possibly the efficacy is also going to go up. So we need to think about the fact that this is going to get worse, just as, for example, the introduction of Bitcoin made ransomware far worse. So on the defender's side, we've got to be aware that we're going to be facing a even more challenging environment in future.
All right, so we have some hands up.
Pessimistic,
Stuart, and then Ben, and then Mark up here.
Okay, so back to the dog breeds
of which there are about 360. It's good that you handled the case where people couldn't remember, because for 125 it would have been a null pointer exception. Anyway, Poodle is number 5, and you've got an entropy space with 360 possible items, and you've told your adversary that it's a dog. So the adversary knows there's a space of 360, and they just have to get one out. Is it, so you said, right, the numbers signal that you're more serious about security. I think on the opposite side, it's someone is just having the experience you'd have coming into an organization that really doesn't care about security. You know, all of the passwords are written not only, you know, on the computer, but also on the wall and in big letters by the window where anyone can see them on the way in. And so they've been told not to take this seriously. So instead of going in the direction of do the digits, right, is there something about the digits? Can you go back and see, is there something that I did here that said you really don't need to care, rather than, and then adding on care rather than adding, right, if you started off with something that was more esoteric.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, so I'm glad that you noted, actually, that I did tell the AI, you're hunting for a dog breed. That was to imitate situations where there's a little bit of information, or at least it kind of knows what it's looking for. But I think it's a fascinating question of, I was trying to make people care more. Can we identify what makes people care less? Nothing in my data speaks to that, but I think it'd be a very interesting thing to do further research on. Like you said, for instance, going in the opposite direction, going from poodle to, I don't know, a color, for instance, where it seems even more innocuous. That'd be a really important area to be doing research in, I think. Thank you.
All really good talk. My question to Ari, I really like the idea of dynamic consent for particularly longer-term mixed methods projects. That's really cool, and I'd love to talk more about it. I guess what's interesting to me there is it also potentially suggests a way of bringing the participant further into other aspects of the research project, analysis, for example, so it becomes more of a co-production. And I was wondering what you thought about that, but also, when you're doing this dynamic consent process, it sounds like that itself will generate a lot of data about the evolution of a person's choices over time. How do you handle that data and ensure that that's also collected and used with consent?
Okay, so the first question was including people in the process of research. What was the second question regarding?
So in terms of the data actually generated, so as someone updates their preferences around particular questions, engages, that is self-generates data. So you might see which questions are particularly sensitive and get additional information about the question.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I hate sitting down and talking. Sorry. So, as part of the process, you can design research methods to include people. That is, you know, if you're a quant person, that's resource intensive. You're never going to do that. That's not where your promotion lies, right? So, involvement, co-creation, co-production, unless you can make a case for it in that you collect more data. So the way I did it was, that's how I designed it. So, I worked with clinicians and legal people and CS people, and the clinicians were way better at that than everyone else, because they're used to having patient panels, and so that's in the governance of big projects. You'll have a panel of advising researchers, academics, policy people, whoever, and then you'll have patient representatives. And so they asked me, hey Ari, how are you going to include your participants? And I said, what? Do you mean user testing? And they said, no, including them in the design of the study. And so that's how we did it. It's a lot more work to add it on at the end, so it really is part of the design process. And you can, so the guidance I made from that study was all about, at the IRB and ethical approval stage, write that participation into the study, have check-in points over time, and basically just plan it so you have to do it. So that's how you might do that. Other people, much cleverer than I, have done it in different ways, but the dynamic consent stuff comes from Australian researchers working with Indigenous communities, where there are completely different understandings of what data is, and completely different understandings of expertise, authority, who you should talk to. It's not individualist. You engage with the elders, you engage with the group. It's a collective form of data production. So we can talk about that at length. And then the other part about updating preferences and stuff, there's a lot of technical issues. A lot of this gets into the design science of these preferences. And again, so I worked with participants and the research team, and it was basically an intervention study. So we changed the feedback, and the research team just did it. And one of the technical issues they had was they had like 7 forms of consent. it's a lot. So I gathered data from over 4 years, right? But over the years that this research had been going, they'd had several iterations of the consent structure, all improved using participant feedback. So they had value in that kind of way. So I'm not saying it's easy, I'm just saying we know how to do change management, we know how to do software design, we have processes for all of this stuff. So that's the kind of research that I'm interested in, and if anyone else is doing it, I'd love to hear about it. But I can talk for ages, so I'll stop there. But it's worth the effort, it gives you a richer data set, and it means that not only are you getting the research data, you're also getting the methods work, that then, once you've done the paper and you don't have time to do impact work, you can get people to advocate for you in your research. So you can write that into your proposals or whatever. So it's a much bigger picture of the role of research and why we do it. So that's all I'm saying. I think it's a good sell.
So unfortunately, we have 1 more minute, and we have several people in the queue, so I invite everyone to talk to our panelists during the break. But Mark, do you have a 1-minute question with possible response?
I think so. I'm sorry if I'm cutting anyone else off. Tesary, just wanted to confirm something. So you had a differential salience treatment, right? And that there was very little difference with that? Okay. So I'm curious your thoughts on why. And part of my question relates, I think Samir mentioned with the EU stipulating, at least for cookie consent, that the buttons need to be the same size, same color, other things. And I don't know for sure if that applies to other consent flows, but it's something that we do think about. We've had some internal debate about this. So why do you think that you observed very little difference with differential salience? Like I might expect there to be significant difference.
Yeah, so there are maybe 2 mechanisms that I'm suspecting. We haven't formally tested any, but so take it as a grain of salt. One is that if this is purely visual kind of manipulation without implying that this is an invalid option to click on, then people would be it would be less effective compared to, say, kind of the design that makes some options more difficult to do than the others. So if you think about reordering and differential salience, those are both purely visual kind of manipulations compared to the one where we deliberately hide the options. So that's kind of one potential reason that I will be thinking about. The second one is that, one caveat of our design, we look at each individual kind of like dark pattern components. We have not looked at the interaction of them. So if you look at kind of the way that in the field, actually kind of they would be kind of putting multiple things together. The most common ones that I have looked at, which is actually shown in the Stack Overflow example in the beginning of the slides, they use both the differential salience and deliberate obstruction. So we could think about kind of potential kind of complementary effect.
Yeah, thank you.
So.
All right, with that, let's thank our panelists.
Bravo.